The auction hall reeked of desperation and disinfectant. Pressed her scaled back against the cold metal bars of her cage, watching as another of her kind was dragged onto the platform. The galactic slave markets of Station had seen better days, but business was still brisk enough to keep the lights on and the credits flowing. Her emerald scales had lost their luster during the 3 months she'd spent in captivity. What had once been a source of pride among her people, now felt like a cruel advertisement of her otherness. She was the last of her clutch to remain unsold, and everyone knew why. Defective, the slave traders whispered, can't reproduce properly. The truth was more complicated than that, but in a galaxy where most species bought slaves for labor, companionship, or breeding stock, being unable to bear offspring made her nearly worthless. Nearly, but not completely. There were always those with specific tastes, specific needs that didn't require fertility. The auctioneer, a corpulent with too many eyes and not enough conscience, cleared his throat with a sound like grinding gears. Next lot, item 779. Female, age 23 standard years, previous domestic training, some language skills. Starting bid at 500 credits. Closed her eyes as the spotlight hit her cage. The platform would rise in a moment, carrying her up to the viewing area where potential buyers could examine her like livestock. She'd been through this routine 4 times already. Each time the bidding would start, someone would ask about her breeding capabilities, and when the truth came out, interest would evaporate faster than water in vacuum. The platform lurched upward with a mechanical whine. Bright lights burned her eyes as she emerged into the main auction hall. Dozens of beings from across the galaxy sat in comfortable chairs, their attention varying from mild interest to predatory focus. Most were the usual crowd, hegemony officials looking for domestic help, mining consortium representatives seeking sturdy laborers, and the occasional wealthy collector of exotic companions. But today, there was someone new. He sat in the back row, partially obscured by shadow. Human, by the look of him, though had limited experience with that particular species. They were relatively new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. Most of the galaxy still viewed them as upstart primitives who'd gotten lucky with their technology. This human appeared to be middle-aged by their standards, with graying hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of either laughter or sorrow. He wore simple civilian clothes rather than any uniform or status symbols, and he watched the proceedings with an intensity that made scales prickle. "Do I hear 500?" the auctioneer called out. A tentative bid came from a merchant who likely needed household help. Knew the type, they'd work her 16-hour days and provide minimal food and shelter. Still, it was better than the alternatives. 550 from the gentleman in Section C, the auctioneer continued. "Do I hear 600? The human's hand moved slightly, a subtle gesture that somehow caught the auctioneer's attention immediately. 600 from the back row. "Do I hear 650? The merchant's headstalks twitched in irritation. He made another bid, clearly annoyed at the competition, found herself staring at the human, trying to read his expression. Most buyers examined her with the clinical detachment of purchasing equipment. This one seemed to be looking at her as if she were actually a person. 700, called out a new voice. Blood chilled as she recognized the speaker, Malik, a human merchant with a reputation for buying exotic beings for very specific purposes. She'd heard whispers about his collection and what happened to those who joined it. The human in the back row straightened slightly. His next bid was calm but firm, 1,000 credits. A murmur ran through the auction hall. 1,000 was well above market value for a defective. Eyes narrowed as he studied his competition, then he raised his own bid, 1,200. 1,500 came the immediate response. Watched this exchange with growing confusion and dread. High-value bidding wars usually meant she'd end up in an even worse situation than standard slavery. Rich buyers often had very particular tastes and the resources to indulge them without interference. Was clearly reaching his limit. He made one final bid, 2,000 credits. The hall fell silent. 2,000 was an astronomical sum for any slave, let alone one with her supposed defects. The human in the back studied for a long moment, then spoke clearly, 5,000 credits. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned by the sudden jump. His face reddened with anger, but he shook his head and sat back in his chair. No slave was worth that kind of money, not even for his twisted purposes. 5,000 going once, the auctioneer managed to croak. Going twice, sold to the human gentleman in the back row. As the platform lowered, tried to process what had just happened. 5,000 credits could buy a small starship or enough equipment to start a legitimate business. Why would anyone pay that much for her? The answer came 20 minutes later when she was led to the processing station. The human was waiting there with the necessary documentation and a credit chip that made the station clerk's eyes widen. Up close, she could see that his clothes, while simple, were well made. More importantly, she could see his eyes clearly now. They were kind eyes, sad but kind. "Hello," he said in surprisingly good. His accent was thick, but the effort was unmistakable. "My name is Thomas. I know this situation is complicated, but I want you to know that you're safe now." Stared at him, unable to form words. In her 3 months of captivity, no one had spoken to her in her native language. No one had used her name, which they'd never bothered to learn. No one had looked at her like she was anything more than property. "I don't understand," she finally managed in standard galactic. "Why did you?" Thomas gestured to a nearby bench where they could sit while the paperwork was processed. "That's a long story. The short version is that I know what it's like to lose everything and feel like you don't belong anywhere. When I saw you up there, saw the way you held yourself despite everything, I couldn't let you end up with someone who would hurt you." "But 5,000 credits is just money." Thomas's expression softened further. "I lost my wife 2 years ago, cancer. We never had children, and when she died, I realized how empty my house felt, how empty everything felt. I'm not looking to replace her or find some exotic companion. I thought maybe we could help each other." The clerk called them over to complete the transaction. As Thomas signed the ownership papers, felt a strange mix of emotions. Legally, she was still a slave. These documents gave him complete control over her life and death. But something about his manner, his words, suggested that legal ownership and actual intent might be very different things. "There's a ship waiting to take us to Earth," Thomas said as they walked through the station's corridors. "My home is in a place called Vancouver. It's quiet, peaceful. You'll have your own room, your own space, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." What about the others?" found herself asking. "My people, the ones still in the cages." Thomas stopped walking. For a moment his face showed a flash of pain so deep that took a step back. "I can't save everyone," he said quietly. "I wish I could, but I can't. Sometimes the best we can do is save one person and hope that somehow it makes a difference." They boarded the transport ship in silence. As station fell away behind them, watched through the porthole until it was just another point of light among the stars. She was leaving behind the only life she'd known since her capture, heading toward a world she'd never seen with a human she'd just met. But for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. The journey to Earth took 6 days through hyperspace. Thomas had booked them separate quarters, which surprised. Most buyers wanted their new acquisitions close at hand, under constant supervision. Instead, Thomas treated her more like a traveling companion than property. He brought her meals, always asking about her dietary preferences and apologizing for the limited options on a transport ship. He shared books with her, including several human works that had been translated into standard galactic. When she mentioned missing the taste of fruit from her, he spent hours researching Earth fruits that might have similar flavor profiles. "Mangoes," he announced on the 4th day, looking pleased with himself. "I think mangoes might be close. We'll try some when we get home." Home, the word felt strange coming from him, stranger still that he'd included her in it. On the final night of their journey, found herself unable to sleep. The artificial gravity on the transport was slightly different from what she was used to, and her scales itched from the recycled air. She made her way to the observation lounge, hopping to find some peace among the stars. Thomas was already there, staring out at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. He looked up when she entered, offering a small smile. "Can't sleep either." "Too much thinking," she replied, settling into a chair across from him. "I know the feeling." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Nodded. "What happened to your people, to your world?" The question hit harder than she'd expected. Closed her eyes, remembering. "Civil war. My clan supported the wrong faction, or maybe the right faction that lost anyway. When the hegemony forces arrived to restore order, they declared us enemy combatants. Those who survived were sold to pay for reconstruction efforts. I'm sorry. Are you? The question came out sharper than she intended. Or is that just something humans say? Thomas considered this seriously. Both, maybe. I am genuinely sorry for what happened to you and your people. But you're right that saying it is easy. Actions matter more than words. What actions do you plan to take? I don't know yet, Thomas admitted. I know I can't undo what's been done to you. I can't bring back your people or your world, but maybe I can give you a chance to decide what comes next for yourself. Maybe that's enough to start with. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars wheel by. Found herself studying Thomas's profile, trying to understand this strange human who'd bought her freedom with what might have been kindness rather than ownership. Thomas, she said eventually. Yes. What was your wife like? His smile was tinged with sadness. Sarah, she was everything good about humanity rolled into one person. She taught elementary school, spent her weekends volunteering at animal shelters, and never met a stray anything she wouldn't try to bring home and fix. He chuckled softly. She would have been furious with me for buying a slave, even with good intentions. She would have said there had to be a better way. But she would have understood, said with surprising certainty. Thomas looked at her with curiosity. What makes you say that? Because you did it anyway. And you loved her enough to know what she would have said, but you cared enough about me to do it despite that. She would have been angry about the method, but not the result. For the first time since she'd met him, Thomas's smile reached his eyes. You're probably right. She always did believe that the ends could justify the means if the ends involved helping someone who couldn't help themselves. I could have helped myself, said quietly, if I'd had the chance. I know, Thomas replied, and now you will. The next morning, they emerged from hyperspace with Earth hanging before them like a blue and white jewel. Had seen images of the human, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer beauty of it. So much water, so much green. Her own world had been mostly desert and rocky highlands. It's beautiful, she breathed. Wait until you see Vancouver, Thomas said. Mountains, ocean, forests all in one place. Sarah used to say it was like the planet showing off. The descent to Earth's surface was smooth and quick. Vancouver's spaceport was smaller than had expected, more like a regional hub than the massive complexes she'd seen on core worlds. Everything seemed more human-scaled, built for beings who valued function and beauty over pure efficiency. Thomas had arranged for ground transport, a small hover car that glided silently through streets lined with trees and gardens. The buildings were a mix of styles and ages, clearly a city that had grown organically rather than being planned by committee. That's my neighborhood, Thomas said as they turned into a district of modest houses, each with its own small yard. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet and the neighbors mind their own business. Mostly. His house was a simple two-story structure with solar panels on the roof and what appeared to be a small garden in the back. It looked like the kind of place where people built lives rather than just stored possessions. This is it, Thomas said, pulling into the driveway. Home. As they walked to the front door, noticed details that spoke of care and attention. The garden was well tended but not obsessive. The paint on the house was fresh but not ostentatious. Wind chimes hung from the porch, filling the air with gentle music. Thomas paused at the door, his key halfway to the lock. I want you to understand something. Legally, I own you. The papers say you're my property, but I don't believe in owning people, and I hope you don't believe your property. This is your home now if you want it to be. You can leave any time you want. I'll help you get established somewhere else if that's what you prefer. Why, she asked. Why would you do all this for someone you don't know? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because 2 years ago I would have given anything for someone to save Sarah. No one could, so maybe saving you is my way of balancing the scales a little bit. Maybe it's selfish, but maybe that's okay. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was warm and welcoming, filled with the kind of accumulated comfort that spoke of years of shared living. Photographs covered the walls and surfaces, most showing Thomas and a woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile. That's Sarah, he said unnecessarily. Studied the photos, seeing the love and happiness they captured. She was beautiful. Inside and out, Thomas agreed. Let me show you your room. You can decide how you want to set it up. The room he led her to was on the second floor, with windows overlooking the garden. It was simply furnished but comfortable. with its own bathroom and enough space to feel private rather than confined. "I know it's not much," Thomas said apologetically. "It's perfect," replied and meant it. After months in cages and holding cells, having a room of her own felt like an incredible luxury. "I'll let you get settled," Thomas said. "If you need anything, just call out. I'll be downstairs. Oh, and welcome home." As he left, closing the door gently behind him, sank onto the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she'd been a slave on an auction block, resigned to whatever fate awaited her. Now she was in a room of her own, on a beautiful world with a human who seemed to genuinely care about her. It felt too good to be true. In her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as the afternoon sun streamed through her windows, and the wind chimes played their gentle song, allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally changed. The first week passed in a careful dance of mutual uncertainty. Thomas gave space to explore the house and property while making himself available when she had questions. He cooked meals for both of them but never insisted she eat with him. He showed her how the various human technologies worked, but never made her feel stupid for not understanding immediately. Spent hours in the garden, marveling at the diversity of plant life. Her had been harsh and unforgiving, with vegetation that grew low and tough to survive the constant winds. Earth plants seemed almost impossibly delicate by comparison, yet they thrived in the gentle climate. "Those are tomatoes," Thomas explained on her third day, finding her examining a plant heavy with red fruit. "Sarah planted them every year. I've been trying to keep her garden going, but I'm not nearly as good at it as she was." "May I?" gestured toward one of the ripe tomatoes. "Of course, help yourself." She picked one carefully, turned it over in her hands, then bit into it. The explosion of flavor was incredible, sweet, tangy, with an underlying earthiness that spoke of rich soil and careful cultivation. Juice ran down her chin, and she laughed in surprise at her own reaction. "It's wonderful," she said, then paused. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so." "Please don't apologize for enjoying something," Thomas said gently. "When was the last time you tasted something just because you wanted to?" The question stopped cold. She couldn't remember. Even before her capture, during the war years, every meal had been about survival, about getting enough nutrition to keep fighting. The simple pleasure of taste for its own sake felt like a luxury she'd forgotten existed. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then we'll have to work on that," Thomas said. "Life's too short not to enjoy good food." That evening, he prepared what he called a proper dinner, multiple courses with different flavors and textures. He explained each dish as he served it, watching carefully for her reactions and making mental notes about what she enjoyed. "You don't have to do this," said as he brought out a dessert that involved fruit and something he called ice cream. "Do what?" "Take care of me like this. I know what I am here." Thomas set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. "What do you think you are?" "Your property, your slave. I know you're being kind about it, but that doesn't change the legal reality." Thomas said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Yes, legally, those papers make you my responsibility. But in my mind, in my heart, you're a guest in my home who's been through hell and deserves some kindness. Nothing more, nothing less. Guests don't stay indefinitely. Some do if they want to, if they find something here worth staying for." The conversation was interrupted by a chime at the front door. Thomas frowned, checking the time. "I'm not expecting anyone." Through the front window, could see a hover car in the driveway with official markings. Two figures in uniform stood at the door, and her scales bristled with instinctive fear. "Stay calm," Thomas said quietly. "Let me handle this." He opened the door to reveal two officers from Earth's Colonial Integration Bureau, the department responsible for managing relations with alien residents and refugees. "Mr." the first officer, a woman with lieutenant's stripes, said, "I'm Lieutenant Martinez, and this is Sergeant. We're here regarding your recent acquisition of an individual." "Is there a problem?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Routine inspection, sir. We're required to check on all new alien acquisitions within 7 days of arrival to ensure compliance with colonial integration protocols." Thomas stepped aside to let them enter. "Of course, these officers need to speak with both of us." Lieutenant Martinez was a professional woman in her 30s with the kind of bearing that suggested military background. Sergeant was younger, perhaps fresh out of training, and he kept glancing around the house with obvious curiosity. Martinez pulled out a tablet, consulting her records. Replied, using her full name for the first time in months. Ms., I need to ask you some questions about your current living situation. Are you being treated well? Yes, answered truthfully. Are you receiving adequate food, shelter, and medical care? Yes. Has Mr. made any demands on you that you're uncomfortable with? Glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. No, he's been very kind. Martinez made notes on her tablet. Mister, what are your intentions regarding Ms.'s employment? I haven't asked her to do anything yet, Thomas replied. She's still adjusting to being here. I see. The paperwork indicates you paid well above market value for her acquisition. Can you explain why? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Have you ever seen someone who needed help and had the means to provide it? That's not really an answer, sir. Lieutenant, Thomas said, his voice taking on an edge hadn't heard before. I paid what I paid because I believed she deserved better than the alternatives available to her. My financial decisions are my own business as long as I'm in compliance with the law. Of course, sir. I'm just trying to understand the situation. Martinez turned back to, Ms., are you aware that as an alien resident of Earth, you have certain rights and protections under colonial integration law? No, I wasn't aware of that. Martinez pulled out a data pad and handed it to her. This contains information about your rights, including access to legal representation, medical care, and educational opportunities. It also includes contact information for support services if you ever feel you're being mistreated. I don't understand, said, looking between the officers and Thomas. I thought. You thought what? Martinez asked gently. I thought I was property, that I had no rights here. Sergeant stepped forward. Ma'am, while it's true that the acquisition papers make Mr. legally responsible for your actions, and Earth law doesn't recognize chattel slavery, you have rights here that you didn't have on station. The room fell silent as processed this information. She looked at Thomas, who seemed as surprised as she was. You knew this? She asked him. I had hoped it might be the case, Thomas admitted, but I wasn't certain how the law worked with acquisition contracts. Lieutenant Martinez consulted her tablet again. Mister, are you familiar with the Integration Pathway Program? No. It's a process by which alien residents can work toward independent status within the colonial integration system. If Ms. is interested, she could begin the program immediately. It typically takes 6 to 18 months, depending on individual circumstances. Felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Independent status? What does that mean? It means you could live and work on Earth as a free individual, Martinez explained. You'd have the same basic rights as any other non-citizen resident. The right to employment, education, legal representation. The right to leave if you choose to. There would be conditions, Sergeant added. Regular check-ins with CIB for the first year, proof of employment or educational enrollment, no criminal violations. But yes, essentially, you'd be free to make your own choices. Thomas was watching's face carefully. What do you think? He asked. I need time to think about this. Of course, Martinez said. Mister, if Ms. decides to enter the integration program, you'd be listed as her sponsor during the transition period. Are you willing to serve in that capacity? Absolutely. After the officers left, Thomas and sat in the living room, both still processing what they'd learned. You didn't know, said finally. I suspected Earth might be different, but no, I didn't know the specifics. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, I should have researched this more thoroughly before we left station. Don't apologize, you saved my life. Did I, or did I just bring you from one form of captivity to another? Considered this. The cage at the auction block was small and cold and smelled like fear. This house is warm and beautiful and smells like growing things. If this is captivity, it's a very comfortable kind. But it's still not freedom. What is freedom? Asked. I was free on my, and war destroyed everything I loved. I was free in space for 3 days after I escaped the first time until raiders caught me and sold me to the slavers. Maybe freedom isn't about not being bound to anything. Maybe it's about choosing what binds you. Thomas was quiet for a long time. What do you want to do about the integration program? I want to learn more about it, but Thomas, if I become independent, what happens to us, to this? She gestured around the room. What do you want to happen? It was a simple question that opened up a vast realm of possibilities hadn't dared to consider. I like it here, she said slowly. I like the garden and the quiet and the way you make me feel like I'm a person instead of a thing. But I don't know if that's because I genuinely enjoy these things or because they're so much better than what I had before. That's fair. What would help you figure it out? Time, experience, a chance to see what other options exist. Then that's what we'll do, Thomas said. We'll start the integration program process. You can explore what's available to you on Earth. And if you decide you want to stay here, it'll be because you chose to, not because you had no other choice. Over the following days, they began researching the integration program together. It was more comprehensive than either had expected. Beyond basic legal status, it included educational opportunities, job training, cultural orientation, and social support networks. Look at this, said, pointing to a section on the tablet. There are other on Earth, not many, but some. There's even a cultural center in Seattle. Would you like to visit them? Yes, I think I would, but not yet. Is that strange? Not at all. When Sarah was going through cancer treatment, sometimes she needed to be around other patients who understood what she was experiencing. Other times, she needed to be away from all of it, to pretend for a while that she was just a regular person doing regular things. Is that what I'm doing, pretending? Maybe, or maybe you're just taking time to figure out who you are when you're not afraid. That night found herself unable to sleep again. She wandered down to the kitchen, thinking she might make some tea with the herbs Thomas had shown her in the garden. She found him there already, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a photo album. I'm sorry, she said, starting to retreat. I didn't mean to intrude. Please stay, I was just looking at some old pictures. He gestured to the chair across from him. The album was filled with photos of Thomas and Sarah together, their wedding, vacations, quiet moments at home. Sarah looked exactly like the kind of person who would rescue stray animals and teach children, radiating warmth and joy even in still images. She was lucky to have you, said. I was the lucky one. Sarah was. She had this way of making everyone around her feel important, valued. She would have loved meeting you. Would she have approved of what you did? Thomas closed the album carefully. She would have been furious with the system that made it necessary, but she would have understood why I did it. He paused, looking out the window at the moonlit garden. Sarah always said that the measure of a person wasn't in what they accomplished when everything was going well, but in how they responded when they had the power to help someone who couldn't help themselves. And now I can help myself. Now you have the opportunity to help yourself. That's not quite the same thing. Made her tea and sat back down. Thomas, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you regret it, buying me, now that you know there might have been other ways? Thomas was quiet for so long that began to worry she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. I regret that the system exists at all. I regret that you went through what you did. I regret that I didn't know about Earth's integration laws before I acted. He met her eyes. But do I regret giving you the chance to be here in this house with the opportunity to choose what comes next? No, I don't regret that at all. Even if I choose to leave. Especially if you choose to leave, Thomas said firmly. Because that would mean you made a real choice based on what you wanted, not what circumstances forced on you. That's what Sarah would have called a good outcome. They sat in comfortable silence after that, sipping their respective drinks and watching the night sky through the kitchen window. For the first time since her capture, felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: possibility. The future was no longer something that happened to her. It was something she might actually have a hand in shaping. Tomorrow, they would contact the Colonial Integration Bureau and begin the process of making her legally free. Tomorrow, she would start taking active steps toward determining her own fate. But tonight, she was content to sit in a warm kitchen with a kind human who had risked everything to give her a chance, drinking tea made from herbs grown in a garden that smelled like hope. The integration program proved more challenging than either of them had anticipated. What seemed straightforward on paper became complex when filtered through bureaucracy, cultural differences, and the simple reality that Earth's systems weren't designed for beings like I need to demonstrate basic literacy in standard galactic, English, and at least one other human language, read from the requirements list. I need proof of employment or educational enrollment. I need to pass a cultural exam and a psychological evaluation. The psychological evaluation concerns me, Thomas admitted. They were sitting in the CIB office in downtown Vancouver, waiting to meet with assigned integration counselor. Not because I think you'll fail, but because I don't trust their ability to evaluate a mind fairly. Ms. A woman approached them, extending her hand. I'm Doctor, and I'll be working with you through the integration program. Doctor was perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of calm competence that suggested extensive experience dealing with complicated situations. Her office was decorated with artifacts from dozens of different species, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and welcoming. Now then, she said, settling behind her desk with file, I've reviewed your case and I have to say it's somewhat unusual. Mister, your method of acquisition was, let's call it unconventional. I did what I felt was necessary, Thomas replied. Oh, I'm not criticizing, Doctor said quickly. If anything, it shows a level of moral courage that's unfortunately rare. I'm more concerned about the psychological impact on Ms. The transition from slavery to freedom can be more difficult than people expect. What do you mean? Asked. When you've been told for months that you have no choices, no control, no value except what others assign to you, suddenly having complete freedom can be overwhelming. Some people freeze up when faced with unlimited options. Others make impulsive decisions because they're afraid their freedom will be taken away again. Considered this, what would you recommend? Take it slowly. Start with small choices and work your way up to bigger ones. And be honest with yourself about your motivations. Are you doing something because you want to or because you think you should want to? That sounds like good advice for anyone, Thomas observed. It is, but it's especially important for people who've been through trauma. Doctor turned to. I'd like to start with some basic assessments. Education, skills, interests. We need to figure out what kind of path makes sense for you. The testing took most of the morning. Formal education had been interrupted by the war, but she'd continued learning through necessity and curiosity. Her technical skills were strong, particularly in engineering and systems analysis. Her language abilities were excellent, which wasn't surprising given that survival had often depended on communicating with different species. Impressive, Doctor said, reviewing the results. You could qualify for advanced placement in several fields. What interests you most? I don't know, admitted. Before the war, I wanted to be a terraforming engineer. My people were hoping to establish colonies on worlds that weren't naturally habitable. But that was a long time ago. Do you still find that kind of work interesting? Thought about the time she'd spent in Thomas's garden, the satisfaction she'd felt helping the plants thrive. Yes, I think I do. Earth has several excellent terraforming programs. The University of British Columbia has one of the best, and it's right here in Vancouver. Would you be interested in exploring that option? Could I do that as part of the integration program? Absolutely. Education is one of the most common paths for integration participants. You'd be eligible for financial aid, and Mister could continue as your sponsor during your studies. Thomas had been quiet through most of the session, but now he spoke up. What would that mean exactly, the sponsorship? Primarily, it means you're responsible for her housing and basic support during the transition period. Since you're already doing that informally, it wouldn't change much practically. Legally, it provides some protections for both of you. Protections from what? Asked. Well, for you, it means you have someone to advocate for you if issues arise with the bureaucracy. For Mister, it means he's recognized as having a legitimate interest in your welfare, which gives him certain rights to information and involvement in decisions that affect you. On the drive home, they were both quiet, processing the morning's information. University, said finally, I never thought I'd have that opportunity again. Are you interested? Thomas asked. I think so, but it feels enormous. 4 years of study, being around so many humans, having to prove myself academically. She trailed off. What scares you most about it? Failing, being the alien who couldn't keep up, who didn't belong there. Thomas pulled into their driveway but didn't get out immediately. You survived a war, captivity, slavery, and being torn away from everything you'd ever known. Do you really think some university courses are going to defeat you? Academic failure is different from survival failure. Is it because from where I sit, they both require resilience, intelligence, and the willingness to keep trying when things get difficult? You've already proven you have all of those things. That evening, they looked at the UBC terraforming program materials together. The coursework was comprehensive: planetary sciences, atmospheric engineering, biological systems, sustainable development. It was exactly the kind of challenging, meaningful work that had dreamed of as a young person. Look at this, Thomas said, pointing to a section about practical experience. They have partnership programs with active terraforming projects. Students can spend a semester working on actual colony worlds. That would be incredible, breathed. To see those techniques in practice, to work with real environmental challenges. Then let's make it happen. Thomas, university is expensive. Even with financial aid, there would be costs. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Sarah and I had been saving for a lot of things that didn't end up happening. That money should be used for something meaningful. Was quiet for a long moment. Why are you so determined to help me? Because helping you helps me, Thomas said simply. For 2 years, I've been living in the past, keeping Sarah's garden alive, looking at old photos, going through the motions of being alive without really living. You've given me something to focus on, something positive to work toward. In a strange way, saving you might be saving me too. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. Only if you let it be. You're not responsible for my healing, but having you here working towards something good together, it's helped me remember that life can still have purpose and joy even after tremendous loss. The next few weeks were filled with application processes, entrance exams, and orientation sessions. Threw herself into the work with an intensity that sometimes worried Thomas. She studied English until her eyes hurt, practiced essay writing until her fingers cramped, and researched terraforming theory with the dedication of someone whose life depended on it. You know you don't have to be perfect on your first try, he told her one evening when he found her still studying at midnight. Yes, I do, she replied without looking up from her textbooks. I'm representing my entire species to these humans. If I fail, it reflects badly on all. That's not fair to yourself. You're one person trying to build a new life. You're not responsible for your entire species' reputation. Easy for you to say, you're not the alien. Thomas sat down beside her. No, I'm not, but I am someone who understands the weight of expectations. After Sarah died, I felt like I had to prove I could carry on without her, that I could honor her memory properly, that I could be the kind of person she would have wanted me to become. It's exhausting, trying to be perfect for people who aren't even there to judge you. Finally looked up from her books. How did you stop feeling that way? I realized that Sarah never expected perfection from me when she was alive. Why would she expect it after she was gone? She loved me because I was human and flawed and trying my best, not because I was some impossible ideal. He gestured toward her textbooks. I think she'd tell you the same thing about your people. They wouldn't want you to destroy yourself trying to be a perfect representative. They'd want you to be happy and successful and true to yourself. You didn't know my people. No, but I know you. And you're someone who cares about doing right by others, who works hard, who doesn't give up even when things are difficult. Those qualities didn't come from nowhere. They came from a culture that valued them, that taught you to embody them. That tells me your people would be proud of you for trying, regardless of the outcome. The conversation marked a turning point. Continued to work hard, but she stopped driving herself to exhaustion. She began to enjoy the learning process rather than just enduring it. She made friends with other integration program participants, sharing experiences and supporting each other through the challenges. Her English improved rapidly, helped by Thomas's patient tutoring and her natural facility with languages. Her cultural scores were excellent, partly because she'd been observing human behavior carefully since her arrival. The psychological evaluation was more challenging, but Doctor helped her work through the trauma-related questions without making her feel like she was being judged. You're doing remarkably well, Doctor told her during one of their regular sessions. Better than most people in your situation. What's different about my situation? You have genuine support. Mr. isn't just providing housing and financial assistance. He's emotionally invested in your success, and that makes an enormous difference. Most integration participants are basically on their own. Is that unusual, having someone care that much? Unfortunately, yes. Most humans who sponsor aliens through the program do it for practical reasons. They need workers or they get tax benefits. Very few do it purely out of compassion. Thought about this later as she helped Thomas prepare dinner. It had become a routine for them, cooking together while discussing their days. Thomas would tell her about his work. He was a software engineer who specialized in designing systems for communication. She would share what she'd learned in her classes or through the integration program. "Doctor says you're unusual," she told him as she chopped vegetables for a stir-fry. "Most sponsors aren't as invested in their participants' success." "Doctor talks to you about me." "Sometimes. She's trying to understand our dynamic, I think, to make sure it's healthy." "And what's her conclusion?" "She thinks we have an unusual but functional relationship. Neither of us is taking advantage of the other. We respect each other's autonomy, and we're both benefiting from the arrangement." "That sounds about right," Thomas agreed, "though I'm still getting the better end of the deal." "How do you figure that?" "You've brought life back into this house. Sarah's garden is thriving under your care. You've helped me remember how to enjoy cooking, how to appreciate small pleasures, how to look forward to things again. I gave you money and legal status. You gave me back the will to live fully." "Thomas, I'm not saying this to make you feel obligated. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I want you to know that whatever you decide to do after you complete the program, you've already given me more than I could have hoped for." That night received an email that changed everything. UBC's terraforming program had reviewed her application and supporting materials. She'd been accepted with a full academic scholarship and a research assistantship that would cover her living expenses. She stared at the acceptance letter for a long time, hardly believing it was real. Then she ran downstairs to find Thomas. "I got in," she said, waving her tablet. "Full scholarship, research position, everything." Thomas's face lit up with genuine joy. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. The stable housing, the support, the help with applications." "You could have," Thomas said firmly. "Maybe not as easily, but you would have found a way. You're too determined and too talented to let circumstances stop you." "What happens now?" she asked. "With us, I mean, will you still be my sponsor once I'm in university?" "If you want me to be. The program allows for continued sponsorship through the completion of education. But you need to understand, once you start university, once you have your own income and academic status, you'll have options I can't give you. You might meet people, find opportunities, discover interests that take you in completely different directions." "Are you trying to get rid of me?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "I'm trying to make sure you know that you're free to choose whatever path makes you happiest, including paths that don't include me." Looked around the kitchen with its warm lighting and herb-scented air, its photos of Thomas and Sarah, its collection of dishes from their shared meals. It felt like home in a way that nowhere else ever had. "What if the path that makes me happiest does include you?" she asked quietly. "Then I'd be honored to be part of it." "Thomas, can I tell you something? About why I was considered defective, why I couldn't be sold for breeding." "Only if you want to." "Reproduction requires emotional bonding. Not just physical compatibility, but genuine caring, trust, affection. I was captured too young to have bonded with anyone, and after the trauma of losing my family, my world, I couldn't form those kinds of connections. The slavers tested me repeatedly, tried to force bonding with various males, but nothing worked." "I'm sorry you went through that. But here's the thing, I think maybe I couldn't bond because I wasn't ready, because I hadn't healed enough, because I hadn't found someone worth bonding with. Being here with you, feeling safe and valued and cared for, I think it's fixing something in me that I thought was permanently broken." Thomas was very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe my being defective was actually my being selective. Maybe I just needed to find the right person, the right situation, the right life." She took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I love you, Thomas, not as a grateful rescued alien, not as a dependent ward, but as a woman who's found a man worth loving." The silence stretched between them, and for a moment worried she'd completely misread the situation. Then Thomas stepped forward and took her hands in his. "I love you too," he said softly. "I have for weeks, maybe longer, but I was afraid to say anything because of the power imbalance, because I didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. And I was afraid to say anything because I thought you still belonged to Sarah's memory." Sarah will always be part of me, Thomas said. But she wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life alone. She'd want me to be happy, to find love again if I could. And I think she would have loved you. They stood in the kitchen, holding hands, processing this shift in their relationship. Everything felt different now, yet somehow exactly the same. The foundation of care and respect was unchanged. They were simply building on it. "So what happens now?" asked. "Now you start university and become the terraforming engineer you always wanted to be. And we figure out how to build a life together, as equals, as partners." As family, Thomas agreed. Outside, Sarah's garden rustled in the evening breeze, thriving under patient care. Inside, two people who'd found each other across the vast loneliness of space began planning a future that neither could have imagined just months before. It wasn't the life either of them had originally planned, but sometimes, thought, the best things came from the plans that got derailed by something better than you could have dreamed up yourself. University life proved to be both everything I'd hoped for and nothing like what she'd expected. The academic work was challenging but manageable, thanks to her natural aptitude and the study habits she'd developed during the integration process. Her professors were impressed by her practical insights and theoretical understanding, particularly when it came to the intersection of biological and technological systems. What she hadn't expected was how much her fellow students would care about her background. "You actually lived through a terraforming disaster?" asked a young man whose enthusiasm for environmental engineering was matched only by his lack of social grace. "What was the atmospheric composition during the collapse? How quickly did the oxygen levels drop? Did you see any of the cascade failures in person?" Interrupted Dr. Sarah, their atmospheric dynamics professor and someone who shared more than just a surname with Thomas. Ms. experiences were traumatic, not research material. "It's all right," said, though she appreciated the professor's intervention. "Yes, I witnessed some of the environmental breakdown on but it wasn't a terraforming disaster in the technical sense. It was war. Orbital bombardment disrupted weather patterns, destroyed atmospheric processors, contaminated water sources. The planet became uninhabitable because of military action, not engineering failure." "That's actually worse from a systems perspective," observed one of the few other women in their advanced coursework. "At least with engineering failures, you can identify the problem and design better systems. Deliberate destruction is much harder to recover from." These conversations became routine as word spread that there was an actual refugee in the terraforming program. Some students were fascinated by her experiences, others were sympathetic, and a few seemed to view her as an exotic curiosity. Learn to navigate these interactions with patience, understanding that for most of her classmates, she was the first alien they'd ever met. "How do you stand it?" Thomas asked one evening after recounted a particularly awkward encounter with a student who'd wanted to measure her skull for an anthropology project. "Some of them treat you like a specimen." "Most of them are just curious," replied. "And honestly, some of their questions help me think about my own experiences in new ways. Today, someone asked me about the psychological impact of losing a home planet, and I realized I'd never really articulated how that felt, even to myself." "And how did it feel?" "Like grief, but with nowhere to visit, nothing to hold onto, no grave to tend. When someone dies, you can honor their memory. When a world dies, what's left?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell the student?" "That maybe what's left is the responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen again. To build better worlds, stronger systems, more resilient communities." "Is that what you want to do? Prevent other worlds from dying?" "I think so. I know I can't stop wars or prevent military destruction. But maybe I can help design systems that are harder to destroy, that recover faster, that support life even under extreme conditions." This conversation marked the beginning of focus on resilient terraforming systems. Her research project, supervised by Dr., examined ways to build redundancy and self-repair capabilities into planetary life support systems. It was theoretical work with practical implications, and it drew on both her technical education and her lived experience of system failure. "This is groundbreaking," Doctor told her during one of their weekly meetings. "Most terraforming research focuses on optimal conditions and maximum efficiency. You're the first student I've worked with who's approaching it from a disaster resilience perspective." "Is that good or bad?" It's necessary. Climate change on Earth, military conflicts on colony worlds, natural disasters anywhere life exists. We need systems that can adapt and survive, not just ones that work perfectly under ideal conditions. Professor, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you related to Thomas? You share a surname, and you've been particularly supportive of my work. Doctor smiled. I wondered when you'd ask. Thomas is my cousin. He told me about your situation, asked if I'd keep an eye out for you in the program. But I want you to know that your acceptance and your research position were based entirely on your qualifications. I didn't have any influence over those decisions. But you've been mentoring me. Because you're brilliant and you're working on something important. The family connection just means I feel comfortable being more direct with you than I might be with other students. Direct how? Thomas is happier than he's been since Sarah died. You're good for him, but more importantly, you're good for yourself. You've taken an enormous trauma and turned it into motivation for meaningful work. That takes strength. Sometimes I feel like I'm just pretending to be strong until it becomes true. That's what strength is. No one feels strong all the time. The strong ones just keep going anyway. As her first semester progressed, began to feel genuinely settled at university. She joined study groups, participated in research seminars, and even attended a few social events. Her relationship with Thomas deepened into something that felt both comfortable and exciting, built on friendship and respect as much as romantic love. I've been thinking about something, she told him one evening as they worked together in Sarah's garden, which had officially become their garden. What would you think about making this relationship legal? Thomas paused in his weeding. Legal how? Marriage, partnership, bond. Whatever humans call it when they want to officially commit to sharing a life. Thomas's voice was careful. Are you sure that's what you want? Not just because it would help with your immigration status or because you feel grateful. Thomas interrupted. If you suggest one more time that my feelings for you are based on gratitude or convenience, I'm going to transplant you next to the tomatoes and see how you like having your roots disturbed. Thomas laughed, the sound bright and surprised. Did you just threaten to garden me to death? I'm considering it. Now answer my question. What would you think about marriage? I think, Thomas said slowly, that it would be the greatest honor of my life. But I also think we should be sure we're doing it for the right reasons. What would be the right reasons? Because we love each other. Because we want to build a future together. Because we make each other better people and we want to make that commitment official. All of those things are true. And what would be wrong reasons? Because I'm afraid you'll leave if I don't lock you down somehow, because you feel obligated to take care of me, because it would solve immigration paperwork. Thomas was watching her face carefully. Are any of those things factors? Considered this seriously. The immigration benefits would be nice, but they're not necessary. I'll complete the integration program successfully regardless. As for obligation, Thomas, you saved my life. You gave me a home and a future and love I didn't think I'd ever experience. I'll always be grateful for that. But gratitude isn't why I want to marry you. Then why? Because when I imagine my future, you're in every version of it that makes me happy. Because you've seen me at my worst and somehow still think I'm worth loving. Because I want to be the person you wake up next to every morning for the rest of our lives. She paused. And because I think Sarah would approve. Thomas was quiet for a long time, his hands still in the soil. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. She would, he said softly. She really would. She always said that love wasn't a limited resource, that opening your heart to new people didn't diminish what you'd felt for others. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Thomas stood up and pulled her into his arms, dirt and all. Yes, I want to marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes, I want to figure out how to blend human and traditions into something that's uniquely ours. Speaking of traditions, there's something I should tell you about bonding ceremonies. Should I be worried? That depends on how you feel about having your genome sequenced by my extended family. I don't have extended family. You will. Bonding creates kinship connections that go beyond individual relationships. When we marry, I'm not just joining your family, you're joining mine. All of them. Every in the galaxy becomes your cousin. Thomas blinked. How many are there? In the galaxy, maybe 2 million on Earth, about 30. 30 is manageable. For now, but Thomas, if we do this, if we bond properly according to tradition, our children won't be considered mixed species. They'll be full members of both communities. Our children, Thomas's voice was carefully neutral. Do you want children? Sarah and I tried for years. It never happened. We were starting to look into other options when she got sick. He paused. I'd given up on the idea. Bonding is intense. It creates biological as well as emotional connections. If we bond successfully, if my reproductive systems are truly healed, then yes, children would be possible. And if they're not healed, then we have each other, and we find other ways to build a family if we want one. Adoption, fostering, mentoring students who need guidance. There are many ways to nurture young lives. Thomas cupped her face in his hands. I need you to understand something. I want to marry you whether children are possible or not. I want to be with you if you become the galaxy's most famous terraforming engineer or if you decide to spend the rest of your life growing vegetables. I want to be with you if bonding works perfectly or if it fails completely. You are enough, exactly as you are. And you need to understand that I feel the same way about you. I love the brilliant software engineer and the patient gardener, and the man brave enough to buy a slave's freedom, and the person still learning how to live after losing someone he loved completely. They kissed then, surrounded by the plants they'd nurtured together, in the garden that had become a symbol of growth and renewal, and the possibility of beautiful things emerging from careful tending. When, Thomas asked when they separated, the legal marriage, anytime. The bonding ceremony, that's more complicated. It requires an elder to officiate specific preparations, genetic testing to ensure compatibility. How long do the preparations take? Traditionally, about a year. But most of that is cultural education for the non-partner and relationship counseling to make sure the bonding won't cause psychological harm. Psychological harm? Bonding creates empathetic connections between partners. You'd be able to sense my emotions to some degree, and I yours. For species that aren't naturally empathic, that can be overwhelming. Thomas considered this. Would it hurt you if the bonding didn't work? It would disappoint me, but it wouldn't change how I feel about you or my desire to be married to you. Then let's do everything. Legal marriage, cultural preparation, bonding ceremony, the whole process. If it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, we'll still be married in every way that matters. Are you sure? 3 months ago, my biggest decision was what to cook for dinner. Now I'm planning to marry an alien refugee, participate in genetic bonding rituals, and potentially become a father to hybrid children. If I can handle that adjustment, I think I can handle whatever comes next. When you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic. The best love stories usually are. That night, they called doctor to discuss the implications of marriage for integration program status. They researched cultural centers to find an appropriate elder to guide them through bonding preparation. They started planning a wedding that would honor both human and traditions. You know what the strangest part is? Said as they sat on their couch, surrounded by marriage planning materials and cultural research documents. What's that? A year ago, I was a slave with no future, no hope, no identity beyond what others assigned to me. Tonight, I'm planning my marriage to a man I love while preparing for advanced studies in a field I'm passionate about. Life can change quickly. Yes, but usually not for the better. Usually, dramatic changes are disasters. This feels like the universe decided I'd suffered enough and sent me everything I needed to build a real life. Maybe the universe has good taste in love stories. Or maybe humans do. Thomas kissed her forehead. I think we're both going to be very happy with how this story turns out. Outside their window, the city lights of Vancouver twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere among them were other love stories beginning, other lives being rebuilt, other possibilities being born from the simple human tendency to help those in need. It was thought a pretty wonderful world to call home. 5 years after the auction block on station, Doctor stood before the United Worlds Terraforming Commission, presenting her doctoral dissertation on resilient biosphere design, lessons from planetary loss and recovery. The commission chamber was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all gathered to hear about revolutionary approaches to planetary engineering. Traditional terraforming assumes optimal conditions and steady-state maintenance, explained, her presentation holographically displaying complex atmospheric models. My research demonstrates that worlds designed around resilience rather than efficiency show 93% greater survival rates when subjected to both natural disasters and deliberate destruction. Commissioner Thane, an elderly with decades of terraforming experience, leaned forward in his seat. Doctor, your models are impressive, but they're theoretical. Have these techniques been tested in practice? Actually, yes, smiled, advancing to the next slide. The reconstruction project has been using my protocols for the past 18 months. A murmur ran through the chamber. Station's home system had been devastated by the same war that had destroyed Swirled, leaving 3 planets uninhabitable. The reconstruction project was one of the most ambitious terraforming efforts in galactic history. Preliminary results show atmospheric stabilization 6 months ahead of schedule and biological diversity indices exceeding all projections. Continued. More importantly, stress testing indicates the new biosphere could survive up to 40% ecosystem loss without cascading collapse. Remarkable, said Commissioner, a elder who'd traveled from this reconstruction zones. Doctor, your work could revolutionize how we approach not just terraforming, but planetary restoration after conflict. The defense of her dissertation took 3 hours. When it was over, when she'd answered every question and addressed every concern, the Commission voted unanimously to approve her work and recommend it for immediate implementation across all UW terraforming projects. Congratulations, Doctor, Commissioner Thane said, shaking her hand. I believe your research will save worlds. Outside the Commission building, Thomas waited with a bouquet of earth roses and spiral flowers, a combination that shouldn't have worked but somehow created something beautiful together. How did it go? He asked, though her expression had already given him the answer. I passed, full approval. They want to implement the protocols system-wide. Accepted the flowers and kissed her husband soundly. Thomas, I think we might actually change how the galaxy thinks about building sustainable worlds. Wait. You've been my sounding board, my research partner, my emotional support through this entire process. Every breakthrough I've had started with a conversation in our kitchen or our garden. Thomas pulled her close. I'm proud of you, so incredibly proud. Are you ready to celebrate? Actually, Thomas said, his expression shifting to something nervous and excited. I have some news of my own. Good news or concerning news? Good news, I think, I hope. He took a deep breath. The reconstruction project offered me a position, senior systems architect for communication networks. It would mean relocating to the system for at least 3 years. Stared at him. Thomas, that's incredible. That project is going to be the foundation for dozens of future colonies. The communication systems you design there will be used across the galaxy. But it would mean leaving Earth, leaving our home, our garden, everything we've built here. Our home isn't the house, Thomas, it's us, it's this, she gestured between them. We can build a garden anywhere. Are you sure? Your research position here, your connections with the university. Actually, said, grinning now, I may have also received an offer I haven't mentioned yet. Project Director for Biosphere Development on the Reconstruction Project. I was waiting to see if you'd be interested in an adventure. You knew? I suspected. When they asked me about my availability for extended off-world research, I may have mentioned that my husband was a brilliant systems architect who specialized in exactly the kind of work they'd need. Thomas laughed, spinning her around despite the formal setting. So we're really doing this, leaving Earth to build new worlds. We're going to do exactly what we were meant to do, said, together. 6 months later, they stood on the observation deck of the transport ship approaching Prime, watching as the planet grew larger in the viewports. What had once been a barren, bombed-out world was now showing patches of green along the continents and wisps of water vapor in the atmosphere. It's working, breathed. The preliminary terraforming is actually working. Look at those cloud formations, Thomas said, pointing to spiral patterns developing over the largest continent. The atmospheric processors are generating weather systems. Weather systems that should be able to survive massive disruption, added. If my models are right, this world could lose half its surface water and still maintain breathable atmosphere. Let's hope we don't have to test that. The reconstruction project was unlike anything either of them had imagined. The base camp alone housed over 10,000 beings from 43 different species, all working together to transform dead worlds into living ones. The scale was massive, the timeline ambitious, the challenges enormous. Doctor, a young approached their quarters on their first morning. I'm Doctor, your research assistant. I wanted to welcome you to the project and let you know how excited everyone is about implementing your resilience protocols. Thank you. How many worlds are we working on simultaneously? 3 in active terraforming, 2 in the planning stages. Your protocols are being used on all of them. Doctor paused. Doctor, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Is it true you're a refugee? That you survived the destruction of your... Yes, that's true. My family was relocated when our world was strip-mined by corporate interests. I know it's not the same as military destruction, but seeing someone who went through that kind of loss become the person designing new worlds, it gives me hope. Was quiet for a moment. Doctor, what's the most important thing to remember about building new worlds? Sustainability. Hope, corrected. You have to believe that life will not only survive but flourish. You have to design for joy, not just survival. Because if we don't build worlds where beings can be happy, what's the point of building them at all? The work was challenging in ways hadn't anticipated. It was one thing to design resilient systems in theory, another to implement them on massive scales with thousands of variables. Every decision affected millions of future lives. Every mistake could cascade into planetary failure. But it was also deeply rewarding. Watching barren landscapes transform into meadows, seeing the first native species successfully introduced to new ecosystems, witnessing the moment when atmospheric oxygen levels crossed the threshold for unassisted breathing. These milestones felt like participating in the creation of life itself. The atmospheric composition on 2 is stable, Thomas reported during one of their evening briefings in their shared prefab quarters. The communication networks are handling the complexity of coordinating 43 species worth of environmental preferences. The biological indicators on Prime exceeded projections again, replied. Biodiversity index is up 12% from last quarter, and the stress tests show the ecosystem could survive a 70% disturbance event without collapse. We're really doing it, Thomas said with wonder. We're building worlds. We're building worlds that could survive another war, corrected. That's the real test. Do you think there will be another war? I hope not, but if there is, these worlds will be ready. 2 years into the project, received a message that changed everything. It was,